Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be doing another episode of Dante's Inferno versus Detente. So let's finish part 2 and part 3 of Taiwan, and we'll go over things that are happening in Israel and also in Ukraine. Let's begin.
You remember our interview with Taiwan's former president Ma, which was so controversial, where he said Taiwan could never defend itself against China. Well, he said something else which caused an even bigger outcry. Here's the background. Ma has long been a major advocate of dialogue with China. He even met Xi Jinping in 2015. No other Taiwanese leader had ever done anything like it. So we asked Ma, could Taiwan work with Xi again? Could it even trust him?
So you think you can trust them?
Well, as far as cultural relations, you have to.
This was an even bigger bombshell than what Ma had said about defense. This idea that Taiwan should trust Xi Jinping despite all of his threats exposed a debate about how far Taiwan could try to engage with China and seek ways to calm tensions down. In this January's election, both opposition candidates running for president called for de-escalating tensions with Beijing. Between them, they won about 60% of the vote. Speaking at his victory event, Lai Ching-te did acknowledge this. He insisted that despite his tough stance, he was ready to talk to China.
用交流取代围堵，对话取代对抗，自信地和中国展开交流合作，增进两岸人民的福祉，达到和平共荣的目标。
This was Lai saying, it's not my fault that we can't talk with China. They're the ones stonewalling us. And he had a point.
Beijing's position, which has always been consistent, is that dialogue can only occur after the political party or political leader upholds the 1992 consensus.
The 1992 consensus? Okay, so we're diving into a bit of really deep detail here about the relationship between Taiwan and China. This is complicated, it's disputed, and it's even a bit weird, but it is revealing about just how tangled the conflict between the two sides is. Amanda Xiao breaks it down for us.
So the 1992 consensus was an understanding that was reached between Beijing and the then ruling party, the KMT, in 1992.
That's from before Taiwan even became a democracy.
Within that understanding, the two sides agreed that there was only one China in the world, and that there would be left respective interpretations of what one China means. So for the KMT,
The United States, under Clinton, had this policy that through economic integration, eventually Taiwan would just be absorbed into Greater China, and that there would be no conflict, and it would be just an eased transition because of economic ties. That was the policy of Clinton, Bill Clinton.
one China means the Republic of China, i.e. Taiwan. From Beijing's perspective, of course, one China is the People's Republic of China sitting in Beijing.
So the idea was that both sides agree that there's one China, but that they don't agree about what that means or who should be in charge. Agree to disagree, if you like. But here's the thing, even that was disputed.
An important thing to note here is that this agreement, or this understanding, actually, was never written down or signed by the two parties, and Beijing never explicitly accepted the second part of that understanding, which is that there are respective interpretations.
So that means that there's not even agreement about whether this is an agree to disagree situation, or whether at the end of the day, China is saying we're destined to reunify with us in charge, accepted. Here's what a Chinese expert said to us.
So China is a trinity of the country, nation, and state. So that's our tradition. And that's the reality. When the Taiwanese know the whole story, know the long history of China, know about the US, the West will not be reliable. It's like maybe in the future of other examples can show that Taiwan's future should be in the hands of all the Chinese and mainland Chinese and the Taiwanese. I think they can accept.
For GETTR, For GETTR and his party, this is a non-starter, and polling suggests that also applies to the majority in Taiwan.
There has never been a political market for the arrangement that China is proposing for unification, which is one country, two systems. There's never been an acceptance of this by the Taiwanese people.
Hong Kong's experience has had a chilling effect on Taiwan. China's notion of one country, two systems was supposed to preserve freedoms in Hong Kong for half a century. Now it's all gone up in smoke.
We haven't seen what happens in Hong Kong. We've seen that one country, two systems, even the promise that will keep 50 years has already been broken. So people in Taiwan have to realize that the so-called one country, two systems simply will not work, whether in Hong Kong or in Taiwan.
And there are no signs of Xi Jinping improving his offer to Taiwan or reconsidering his view of GETTR as separatist. China's objections extend from Lai, in fact, to his vice president Xiao, who we heard about earlier. Xiao has an American mother and strong US connections.
She's very American-biased, actually, in the eyes of the mainland. So it's the independence is from the blood. So that's the reason I think mainland Chinese don't like her.
China has even hit Xiao with sanctions.
The target is external intervention and some separation force in Taiwan. That's the reason we put Xiao Meiqing or those guys as the target of the sanctions, not the Taiwanese other politicians or the Taiwanese people. So they are put Taiwanese future in danger. So they are the enemy of our Chinese nation. So what does this all mean? Are all hopes of some sort of engagement between the new government and Beijing dead in the water?
Amanda Xiao does point out that low-level engagement does continue, leftovers from an era of better relations.
There are in place over 20 cross-strait agreements between Taiwan and China on a variety of issues, ranging from notary services to law enforcement cooperation to tourism. Even though formal cross-strait dialogue has been frozen since 2016, those agreements still stand, and so there remains some space at this more functional working level for communications to increase and for cooperation to perhaps deepen.
One possibility is for some opening up of tourism between the two sides, but this is all quite low-level stuff.
The question is there any chance of China softening its line on Taiwan?
Xi Jinping has repeatedly said that what he calls reunification with Taiwan is inevitable, and that he reserves the right to use force to achieve that. We asked Chinese expert Wang Yiwei how Beijing feels this threat of invasion is appropriate.
So this is a deterrence. This is our sovereign's rights to keep the unity, integrity, and sovereignty of China. This is use of force. It's not to kill the Taiwanese people. No, it's want to deterrence the external forces, not interfere of our domestic affairs.
Amanda Xiao says there's no reason to expect any movement from China on what it sees as its most fundamental interest.
For Beijing, taking that threat off the table would be very dangerous because it would open up the possibility of Taiwan moving further down this independence path that they see them going down.
And Li Ximin says any hope of persuading Xi Jinping to change his approach is wishful thinking.
Xi Jinping already said that the unification of Taiwan is the historical inevitabilities, and it is part of his China dream. So no way that the Taiwan just used different ways to engage with mainland China, so China will change their attitudes.
So let's pull everything together for a moment. In part one, we saw how Taiwan wants to improve its deterrence against a possible Chinese attack, but that it's struggling with how to do that. And then in part two, we saw that Taiwan also would like to engage with China, but that Beijing is stonewalling over preconditions. Well, now in part three, we're going to discover some wild cards that could scramble everything.
It was 1959. The bossa nova changed music. Ella Fitzgerald, Gillespie, Deep Sinatra. I came across a name on.
Remember these guys? These were the opposition candidates in Taiwan's presidential election. There's Ho Yo-yi. He was running for the KMT, the party that ruled Taiwan as a dictatorship for decades before turning democratic. It's the same party as former President Ma, who said those controversial things in our interview. But there was also Ko Wen-je. Let's talk about him for a minute. Ko was a surgeon before he turned to politics and formed his own party, the TPP, or Taiwan People's Party, just a few years ago. He called for a pragmatic approach to China, but was vague about details. His campaign was mostly about making the economy work better for young people. We saw on the ground how he really inspired his supporters with some of the biggest rallies in the days before the election. Ko finished in third place for president, but he could end up with way more power than you'd think. In this place, Taiwan's parliament. That's because of how the election played out on this legislative level. Ko's TPP party won only 8 seats in parliament out of more than 100, but neither of the top 2 parties got a majority. So those seats give Ko the balance of power. And he can use that power to help the government get things done, or block things he doesn't like. It gives him huge influence over all sorts of sensitive stuff.
If U.S. were to sell a weapon system to Taiwan, for example, these are big-ticket items, which will be challenging for the ruling party to pass legislation, including budget bill alone on their own, and they will likely be needing TPP support. Just a few votes of difference can make the difference between whether Taiwan can pass or cannot pass significant defense cooperation bills.
So what about those weapons that would be needed to fight an asymmetric war against China? Ko and his party may have the ultimate say.
They will be the ones who are, quote unquote, trying to watch out for the purse strings for little guys in Taiwan. They're going to be likely to be less gung-ho about spending budgets on defense procurement, when they'll argue those same budgets should go to more bread and butter issues, maybe more school lunches for Taiwan's children, maybe a bit more money for welfare for the disabled or handicapped, for example. These are all arguments that they're likely to use, I think, as they go about slashing defense budgets.
That would make Ko and his party a highly attractive target for China.
Not try to make any judgment about political motivation or integrity of TPP as a political force per se, but to simply say that at this stage, TPP being the new kid on the block is relatively under-financed in terms of campaign financing, is probably still relatively embryonic in terms of personnel, talents, as well as human networks, generally speaking. So I think the reason why Beijing will want to keep TPP high on its list of priorities when you think about how to create and deploy more openings in Taiwan politics.
Koonja insists he has no illusions about China and says Taiwan should stand up for its freedoms in any dealings with Beijing.
他的底线就是我们希望维持目前我们民主自由的政治体制和生活方式，这是台湾的底线。那我也知道你的底线是什么。那在中间，我们试着去找到一个平衡点。
But Xi Jinping has every incentive to shift that equilibrium. China has long sought to influence Taiwanese politics, both out in the open and more covertly. This new situation in Parliament could offer it big opportunities. The prize could be not just hampering Taiwan's efforts to strengthen its defenses, but undermining its relationship with the US at the same time. As we heard earlier, a future US administration might be unforgiving if Taiwan started to wobble on defense.
I think this is really important for people on Taiwan to understand, because I think Americans are not going to be prepared to lose a ton of people and money and reputational capital if Taiwan is indefensible, especially if there's a perception that Taiwan is not serious about its own defense. You don't want to end up like Ukraine. That is completely correct. The way to avoid ending up like Ukraine is to have the military capability that Xi Jinping has been talking about.
Volodymyr Zelensky was hailed as a hero, but his cause has been sucked into the vortex of American politics. Taiwan's new president could face similar risks, especially because those asymmetric weapons that Taiwan will need from the US, they're exactly what Ukraine needs more of too, meaning Taiwan could find itself pulled deeper into debates about America's priorities. Li Shimin doesn't shy away from that.
In my point of view, I think Taiwan is much more important than Ukraine for the United States. Don't forget the Ukraine. They still have kind of European country. They should work together with the Ukraine to defend the invasion from Russia. It's not the sole responsibility for the United States. If the Taiwan is taken by the China, then the United States will lose their credibilities, and the other regional countries will not trust the United States anymore. That means that China will dominate Asia, and they can successfully push the U.S. military out of the West Pacific. Then it is very strong impact for the United States, much more stronger than the Ukraine.
Everything is so entangled with everything else. The US, China, Ukraine, Russia, knock-on effects for Europe, and at the heart of it all, Taiwan, facing threats that you can hardly fathom, and decisions that are almost too ominous to take. For Li Shimin, there's one simple lesson to hold on to.
God only help those people who help themselves. If you don't have the will to defend, nobody will help you to defend you. That is the good attitude that Taiwan should have.
It's going to be up to Lai Ching-te to try to bring all this together as he embarks on one of the toughest jobs in the world. This is a test of stamina for Taiwan, for China, and for the United States. And it's a test through not just 2024, but every year that follows, until maybe one of them runs out of steam. People here in Taiwan know that they have the most to lose.
I've been saying for 4 years, since the start of the crisis, that what happens in Taiwan is going to reverberate around the world, and that the hegemonic power of the United States is going to be challenged, and we are going to be losers no matter what happens. The question is, how much will we lose? If China wins the Pacific Theater, the United States will be heavily truncated in terms of its projection of power in the world. And we will have expended an enormous amount of resources, military resources, and financial resources to try to win the war. And will be even a weaker power than the UK after World War I and World War II. If we win the war, we will be a declining empire with some hegemonic projection, but we will not have the standard of living pre-war with China. So the question really is, how much of a decline do we want? If you want a severe decline, the maximum decline, then the United States would be losing the war with China. If you say, well, something that's more like the UK model, post-World War I, then winning the war with China in the Pacific theater would have to happen for the United States. That's what's going to happen. The United States, people need to realize the United States, because of its internal struggle, because of the over-indebtedness, because of the poor decisions that we made post-Cold War, the empire is dying. Now, I take the stance that we have to defend Taiwan to not just help the Taiwanese, but also to slow down the hegemonic power of the Chinese. And when this war happens between the United States and China, China most likely will lose. And the United States will be severely hampered. There's not going to be a real winner in this. But the Americans, through poor domestic and foreign policy, has led to this situation. You have to pick the less bad shirt, if you want to use some analogy. Which path, if you're an American, which path do you want? Absolute destruction of your country and its hegemonic power, or 50% of it? You're not going to have the same type of power and influence and affluence that we had since World War II. Americans have made poor decisions. Its leaders have made poor decisions. The national security state has made poor decisions. And it will literally destroy the greatness of the country. That's where we're at. And I'm not the only one saying it. Okay, let's I want to take a look at some of the things that I was looking at today in the morning. I want to play some of the. Okay, this is Mayor Adams faces backlash over plan to move money to illegals.
This bobblehead is just ridiculous. And did you notice who it is? That's right, none other than the man who will make this country great once again. Tagline.
Let's bring in Harlem resident and executive director of Silent Voices United, Tiffany Fulton, and criminal defense attorney Vic Bajaj. Welcome to you both. Thank you both. 1 in 4 kids, Tiffany, welcome to the program. 1 in 4 New York City kids living in poverty, and yet they're spending tens of millions on prepaid debit cards to the illegal immigrants. What do you think about this whole setup?
I have a problem with that because we have people that live right here in our country, people with families and children, and they need that help. So for them to be giving it to illegal migrants or migrants that's coming into the country and giving out this free money. What about the people that live here in the United States of America?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Vic Bajaj, to you now, because I want to play this video. A migrant who is accused, this is body cam video, by the way. A migrant is accused of killing a Florida deputy. He's now suing the deputy's estate, claiming he had a disability or not knowing English. That was the disability here. I mean, have you heard of a case like this, Vic? Is there a case like this? Or are the lawyers just using these people to try to get a leg up on the justice system?
Well, let me tell you how unbiased I'm going to be here. I'm a defense attorney, so usually I'm fighting the government against some fruitful or fruitless charges against my clients. This is throwing yet.
My understanding is there's been an increase in lawyers of an increase in the number of lawyers out there by about 6.6%. I believe this is data coming from 2022 or 2023. It might be 2022. But the point is that we have had an increase in lawyers. All right. The country, part of the problem that I was stating and how we were declining from internal policy is that we're allocating people into careers such as lawyers where the country is becoming too litigious and that you can't do anything because there's too much regulation or you're worried about a lawsuit or whatever. Lawyers have caused this problem. Lawmakers have caused this problem. We need more engineers and less lawyers. We need more freedom and less regulation for the country to prosper. Now, part of the reason why China was able to grow so fast is because it didn't have so much regulation. Now, yes, there, through good regulation, you prevent the destruction of the environment and you improve this, the safety of the society or the worker. For example, some OSHA regulations are important for the safety of the worker. I'm not saying get rid of all regulations, but when you have a litigious society, when you have an overreach of the government, you have too much regulation. You have fear of being sued all the time. And because of that, the society crumbles from within because it's not as productive. Then you add in AI and all this stuff, and you're going to start now having less people working, and the society will be even more less productive because you are, just because a robot can make it, right, doesn't mean that the GDP is going to go up, because who's going to buy the product? You may be making a bunch of product that just sits on a shelf. There has to be producers, there has to be buyers. And when you shut down the production because of regulation or a litigious society, or you shut down the labor because of regulation and a litigious society, and even the implementation of certain types of technology like AI, then society isn't going to be as productive.
Thing against the wall. Now, you don't have to be a citizen to have constitutional protections, right, but you still have to have a righteous claim. Now, this individual, interestingly enough, Trace, was just declared incompetent by the criminal court. So the criminal case is on hold regarding the manslaughter against that officer who actually died from a cardiac arrest during this incident. Yeah. That's on hold, but the civil case is going, perhaps short-sighted by the lawyers, because his client or their client will have to be deposed to prove that case. So it will come out of the bag eventually.
It really is kind of amazing. Now, Tiffany, there are pictures. I got some pictures, and I know you toured this luxury building that is about to become a migrant shelter. And I want to put these pictures up because this is what's about to be in the Harlem area, a migrant shelter. But more concerning, I want to play some sound of an angry Harlem resident. Watch this and we'll get your response.
We got enough shelters. We're oversaturated. And in every borough that doesn't have the same amount of shelters as we have, in every zip code, they have to come up and meet us first. Before they even start.
I mean, all they're saying, Tiffany, is it's not fair.
It's totally not fair. It's totally not fair. I was one of the few Harlem residents that went on that tour, and it's a beautiful location. And we had a housing project right across the street, St. Nicholas Houses, where they're getting ready to be relocated or displaced because they're going under renovation. So I did ask the mayor, and I asked all the other city officials there, instead of displacing the senior citizens or people that are disabled, if we're gonna make this a migrant, or we're gonna make this a shelter, period, why not make it for the people across the street in that housing project of over 3,000 people with disabilities and senior citizens? Why not move them in there?
Why not? It's a very good question. Finally, Vic Bajaj to you. FoxNews.com says the following, quoting here, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is suing a Catholic non-governmental organization, a Catholic charity, in other words, alleging that it is encouraging illegal immigration and operating a stash house for those entering illegally. Can you sue a Catholic charity for something like that, Vic?
Absolutely. A Catholic charity may not have to pay taxes, but they have to abide by the law. And if you're aiding and abetting illegal immigration, which is a serious crime in the state of Texas, where it's being enforced, not like the federal side, well, then that's still a crime. That's still ripe for investigation. The answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Vic Bajaj, Tiffany Fulton.
All right, so that's what's going on in New York. All right, so let's all right, this is a discussion on the Israeli-Hamas war and how Netanyahu revealed plans for the post-war. And then we'll talk about the royal family.
Or UAE into this process, although he does not have those commitments yet. And
Vous voulez parler couramment français? Then pay close attention to what I'm about to say. I want to teach you 5 key principles that 99% of French courses skip right over.
Gaza border here, as Israel's prime minister is urging that, quote, local officials who are not affiliated with terrorism will govern Gaza after the war. Netanyahu presented the security cabinet with his plans for a post-war Gaza, saying the strip must be ruled by people who are not affiliated with Hamas. The Palestinian Authority, though, rejecting the plan as an attempt to, quote, prolong the genocide. In the meantime, the Israeli War Cabinet voting to send a delegation to Paris for a discussion on a deal that would free the remaining hostages that were taken by terrorists back on October 7th and also bring a ceasefire, at least temporarily. I want to talk about all the latest developments here, so let's bring in a special guest, Dr. Melanie Garson, Associate Professor in International Conflict Resolution and International Security at University College London. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
good morning, thank you.
All right, so first off, I do want to talk about this plan that Netanyahu did release over to the cabinet. This is about the post-war Gaza and who will rule it. What essentially do we know now about this plan? And my follow-up question here, does Netanyahu have the authority, the power to decide this?
It's a really good question, and it's an interesting plan, and the timing of it as well is particularly critical as they go into another set of negotiations. There's been a big call to say that Israel doesn't have a vision of what day zero looks like in Gaza. The plan fundamentally focuses on no reconstruction without demilitarization, holding a strong security zone also on the Egyptian border. So it required in this plan continuing security presence from the Israelis within Gaza until this reconstruction and stabilization has happened. It is a decentralized approach, relying on bringing together a combination of figures that would have authority but are distant from Hamas, and not just Hamas, but also from Fatah, from Palestinian authorities, particularly what's been cited, the pay for slay kind of
policies, so that to really try and minimize anybody associated with terrorism or the supports of the structures of terrorism within it. And then it sort of moves forward, what would the reconstruction look like, and de-radicalization, and particularly highlight bringing in what would be like-minded countries such on the de-radicalization, particularly thinking about Saudi or UAE into this process, although he does not have those commitments yet. And those countries have stated that they, will only see sort of relations in the context of a Palestinian state. So it's a broad-ranging plan, keeping Israel in security control and trying to sort of devolve political control to non-terror associated entities or policies.
There's been a lot of protests, I would say an uptick outside of Israeli lawmakers' homes and other public officials there, as folks are calling for essentially elections. They want to have an election for prime minister here. Is it possible that Netanyahu is actually ousted from office while this war is ongoing? Because he said that he doesn't want elections to be held while there is a war. So is it possible he's actually ousted?
The FanDuel, every night is a watch party.
You notice with that commercial that popped in, right? It has basketball. It has the rap in the background, focused on the black, right? And that whole urban culture. This is part of the degrading of the society. I'll tell you, I think a big part of the problem of the Black community today compared to, let's say, the 1950s, all right, pre-civil rights, you look at pictures, right, and a lot of these Blacks that were in, the 40s and 50s, they dressed very appropriately, right, and they were well-mannered. Even though in some states that, there was segregation, right? In other states, there wasn't segregation. But right after the civil rights movement and going into, the late 60s and into the 70s, and you have that whole Black Panther kind of crowd, right? That urban decay starts. And that is when you start seeing the actual dressing of Black males, especially, they're not in suits anymore. They're in the streetwear. And then you fast forward to the 1980s, where you have the whole hip hop and the rap culture, and it gets even worse. Then as Blacks become more prominent in basketball, it gets even worse. See, it's almost as if they're targeting to try to destroy certain types of ethnicities. Unfortunately, people bought into it. So you got that whole, you have the whole rap culture and the drug culture and the basketball culture and all this stuff that is really not that productive for the society. The society in general is worse off. People need to wake up.
It's extremely difficult. I mean, there were talks about originally should you have taken responsibility and stepped down, or even admitting responsibility wouldn't necessarily require a resignation. The general census would definitely have to call an election very soon after the war is ended at any point. So there would have to be an early election. But the sense is it's possible. And the process involving no confidence votes from his own parties or movement from his own support base to another support base to indicate that he doesn't have the full support to be able to carry this forward. It's still slim. And I often see the situation a bit like the squirrel from Ice Age that's holding on to the nut very, very, very tightly, even though everything else is swirling around him. And I don't perceive from what we've seen that he's going to let go of that until he's seen from his perception through what he sees to be an end point to the war as it stands.
Another topic that's being discussed right now is this delegation that the War Cabinet says will go over to Paris to talk about those hostage release plans, a deal there that would also include at least a temporary ceasefire. From what you've seen, does it appear that we are any closer to an actual deal being reached? Because it keeps seeming like maybe we're there and then it just doesn't happen.
So what seems to be different about this particular delegation going over from what has been seen previously, the delegations have been on what has been instructed to be a listen-only mode. And the reports coming out indicate that they're not going just in listen-only mode, but they're going in a negotiation mode so that there either has been sufficient information or sufficient movement that they can go in that negotiation mode, and possibly we may see something out of this particular deal. The suggestions of that there's significant US pressure, sort of with the envoy, of course, CIA Director William Burns is over in Paris at that, and there is a very strong drive to try and have a pause before Ramadan, which starts on the 10th of March or thereabouts.
And you're, of course, in London. What do you think about the UK abstaining from the vote on that Gaza ceasefire resolution in the UN? We know the US eventually voted against it. They vetoed it. Why did the UK abstain from voting?
Well, the UK often abstains from voting in these procedures in the UN. I think it's because of this tension over an immediate ceasefire versus pauses, and sort of trying to bridge somewhere in between to try and indicate that they would be amenable to the type of vote that would indicate something a little bit more temporary, but it's not quite as unequivocal as the United States has been in their support on this.
My last question here. The head of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees says that UNRWA has reached a, quote, breaking point after several countries pulled funding following those accusations of UNRWA employees being involved in the October 7th attack on Israel. Is that statement likely to cause any countries to resume their funding?
UNRWA was a pseudo-government within the Palestinian territory.
I think that there's been sufficient evidence presented that UNRWA is fairly rotten to its core, and despite the possibility that it has the structures to be able to disseminate the humanitarian aid, what has come to light is that actually Hamas is hijacking those structures, or either UNRWA has given them that license unwillingly or willingly, but that the whole institution is riddled.
That's why I said when it comes to the soul root of Esau, he's an animal and you can't trust him. The only way this is going to end is that Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran are absolutely, completely destroyed.
With Hamas support endemic within it. There are other structures, there are other organizations, there are other humanitarian organizations that are not that are already present within the Gaza Strip. There's other UN organizations, the World Health Organization. There is UNHCR itself, which is the global organization that's in charge of refugees and should be in charge of the Palestinian refugees equally. So it's not saying do not provide this aid. It's not saying that the people don't have this aid. It's find a better structure to do it through, and there are certainly those structures available and on site.
All right, Dr. Melanie Garson there, University College London. As always, a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here to break down the latest headlines as the Israel-Hamas war is now
so that was live now. Fox. Now I want to play the CNN perspective on that.
Looks like you won something there.
Yeah, I ditched my tax guy and switched to H&R Block. I feel like a tax champion.
Is that easy?
So much more convenient.
The Palestinian Authority is lashing out at Benjamin Netanyahu's proposal for Gaza's post-war future, calling it a plan for the reoccupation of Gaza. This after the Israeli Prime Minister unveiled a day-after plan to members of the Security Cabinet Thursday night. It includes the complete demilitarization of the enclave, closing off Gaza's southern border with Egypt, as well as the overhaul of Gaza's civil administration and education systems. This comes as Israel joins talks in Paris aimed at a ceasefire in its war with Hamas, the potential release of hostages as well. There's a growing sense of urgency to find an agreement here after Israel threatened to expand its assault in Gaza's southernmost city, Rafah, if hostages are not released by the start.
See, now, listen and hear me out. Now, I know that I have a certain bias to this because of my religious affiliation. Some people agree with me, some people don't. That's okay. All right. But we have a national security state that is out of control. Now, think about it from the standpoint of the Israelis. All right. They have this existential threat that's going on. And, they have if you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. But they have a big part of the society has this concept of rebooting the temple, taking down the Dome of the Rock, and going to biblical borders for Israel. You could agree with that or disagree with it. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with it. It's just that that's the perspective of many, many Israelis, all right, and many, many Jews around the world, all right? Now, you have this national security state in the United States that wants to just keep on kicking the can down the road and let Iran end up go nuclear. Why? So we have a justification to have all this advanced weaponry and anti-ballistic missile technology be developed, and how that would probably also fund Star Wars in outer space. A great way to help take down the national security state is actually let the whole Middle East go up in flames and break the plan of the national security state to allow for Iran to go nuclear. And that policy is actually safer for the world. See, we're told in America, try to reduce tension in that region, and there'll be some sort of peace negotiation, some sort of détente, right? But perhaps Dante's Inferno is the better policy because it doesn't kick the can down the road where there's more probability of destruction and it's going to be more costly. Going after Hezbollah and Hamas indirectly is going after the rotten core of the national security state. So do you really want to save the country, the United States? Then perhaps you need to start going against what Burns wants to do, the head of the CIA. Start going against what the national security state wants. And then perhaps we'll have a fighting chance for our constitutional freedoms. Because I guarantee you, if you go in the same direction, if you go in the same grain, in the same vein of the national security state, and what the directors of the CIA are wanting, you're only writing your own death sentence.
For that in about 2 weeks from now. CNN's Nick Robertson is in Tel Aviv for us with the latest. So let's just talk about this plan, Nick. Demilitarization of Gaza, indefinite military control by the Israelis. Also, Israel would have basic control of all sort of access points to Gaza as well. Just give us more detail in terms of what is in this plan and how the US will likely respond to certain parts of this.
Yeah, we've actually already heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken referring to a couple of parts of it. He said he'd just seen reports about it and he'd yet to get into the detail of it. One of the things that stands out in this proposal by Prime Minister Netanyahu is the full control of Gaza, all the borders, which means taking control of the southern border along the border, what is now the border between Gaza and Egypt. And he says that is to stop any smuggling underground using tunnels or overground. That would be a significant change. It could well be contested. And of course, that thing alone, and there are other issues as well, but that one point alone brings into question the idea of a Palestinian statehood if it can't control its borders. But of course, another point that Prime Minister Netanyahu put in his plan is that there will be no independent, or Israel will certainly not recognize any independent recognition of a Palestinian state. And that's a message to the United States. One of the other points, and this is one of the points that
I just want to pause this and just read the bullet points here. Netanyahu's plan for post-war Gaza, complete demilitarization. How could you be against that? Esau's crazy. Closing off the southern border with Egypt to stop smuggling. Overhaul of civil administration and education systems. That sounds pretty bright because you know what? Their educational system is just feeding hate in Gaza. And it's time for them to start becoming productive citizens within their country. Security control over the entire area west of Jordan. Totally makes sense because you got to remember what's really going to happen is that the people that are in the West Bank and in Jerusalem that are Palestinian that don't want to play nice with Israel, they're going to be kicked out and moved into Gaza. And hence the West Bank and all of Jerusalem is owned by the Israelis. Occupied by it's not even occupied. It's going back to biblical boundaries. It'll go even worse than this. It'll actually go into Jordan to get land. And it'll go into Syria, parts of Syria and parts of Lebanon and parts of Egypt. Now, is that 10 years from now? I don't know. Is it 20, 30, 20 years from now or 30 years from now or 2 days from now? I don't know. But this is where it's going. So you have to control the West Bank because they're going to start attacking. And when they attack, then you round them up and throw them into Gaza. Shut down UNRWA. It's been running as a pseudo government for the Palestinians and not as a real nonprofit, humanitarian aid organization. And this is the problem with Esau. They try to tell the international community, fund these organizations, these nonprofits, and we'll help the Palestinian people. How much help did you really actually offer? Because the leadership wants the world to think and to see the squalor that's going on in Gaza. Meanwhile, not ask the question, perhaps maybe the people within Gaza should start running their land and be a productive country. They don't want that. They want to show the world squalor to try to put pressure on Israel to give them more land. No unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Damn straight.
Is that in the plan there will be, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, a border area inside Gaza, giving security for Israel outside of Gaza for as long as is deemed necessary. And that is something that the United States had previously opposed specifically. So that also seems to sort of...
Why should the Israelis even give a damn what the U.S. has to say? Yes, I know that they're giving arms and all this. But you got to remember, look at the big arc of this. The national security state in the United States failed to handle Iran. So by letting Israel do what it needs to do and go back to biblical boundaries and to allow for the third temple to be rebuilt or to emerge, all right, and to bring down the Dome of the Rock, it's doing two things. It's bringing down our national security state, which is a good thing. And oh, by the way, it's actually solving the problem that should have been solved during the Crusades. And that was the Christians should have torn down the Dome of the Rock when they had control of Israel, of Jerusalem, back during the Crusades.
The face of what Israel's allies are saying. Another point that's raised as well is Israel passing over or giving some sort of civilian control to unnamed, unspecified civilian bodies or persons. But also it talks about de-radicalizing inside schools, inside welfare institutions. Again, that does not really sound like an independent Palestinian state. In fact, this is, I think, the point that the Palestinian Authority are making, that this is really a reoccupation by Israel, although Israel is saying it will.
Esau is a bunch of animals, and until Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran are out of the picture, completely decimated, completely destroyed, you can't allow for the Palestinians to have their own state. It has to be staged. If Netanyahu does what I hope he does, which is actually destroy Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, if he does that, he will go down in history as one of the most important people to actually create long-lasting 1,000-year peace in the Middle East, not a 50-year peace that's expedited and is pragmatic for some sort of U.S. consumption. We're looking at a 1,000-year arc here that what's emerging. But I know there's going to be people that disagree, and that's okay. It's okay. You can see, I'm not all war, but I do know this. If we don't solve the problem with Iran, it's going to get a whole hell of a lot worse.
It will completely demilitarize the whole area, but it clearly wants to be able to have operational ability inside the freedom of operational movement for security measures. So this is what the Palestinian Authority is talking about. So this is, it appears, a very maximalist plan that's been put forward by the Prime Minister. This is not set in stone. It's something that will be discussed, but I think it indicates even to allies like the United States that Israel's position is on Gaza is really as strong and as hard as it has ever been.
Yeah, a lot of people will look at this plan and see it as a reoccupation of Gaza, or at the very least, preventing any kind of Palestinian sovereignty, at least in the short term. What sort of regional reaction are we getting?
So far, we've yet to hear from some of the regional partners, in particular Qatar, that is the interlocutor at the moment between Israel and Hamas to get the hostages released, and the language that's been put forward, although it doesn't specify Qatar by name, but the language seems to imply that Qatar would not be part of the plan going forward for having an involvement as it has had until now, essentially helping finance through Israel and the United States the authorities inside Gaza. That appears to be ruled out. Israel is saying that the Arab partners that it would have to help administer and finance what happens inside Gaza would be of its choosing. And the indication is that Qatar not named, but would not be one of them. So how they'll respond isn't clear. Obviously, the plan to control the southern border is going to affect Egypt. We haven't heard them yet reply specifically to this, but it will have potentially territorial implications for them and other implications as well. And we know that right now, the Egyptians are building a buffer zone, an additional security zone along that southern border, potentially in preparation for those Palestinians who are stuck in Rafah if they try to get over the fence and escape out of Gaza if there's an Israeli ground incursion. But this could also be potentially because Israel is going to take control of that border.
Nick Robertson, live for us there. Thank you so much. Israel is rejecting disturbing allegations reported by UN experts of its forces killing, imprisoning, and raping Palestinian women and girls, saying the allegations are motivated by hatred for Israel. Earlier this week, UN experts said they were distressed by reports of multiple forms of sexual assault against Palestinian women and girls in detention, including being stripped naked and searched by male Israeli army officers. Those UN experts are calling for an independent investigation, and the unique toll on women in this conflict cannot be ignored. Statistics from the UN show that around 70% of those killed in Gaza are estimated to be women and children, and that 2 mothers are killed every hour.
What about the statistics of all Black women on the Supreme Court in New York? All right, my understanding is they have 5 seats at the state level, Supreme Court. That's my understanding. I could be wrong, but even if it's more, it proves my point even more. All right. If there's only 1.5% of the lawyers that are Black females, the statistics to have all 5 seats at the Supreme Court level in New York to be Black women is statistically impossible for it to be random. It statistically shows that there was some sort of orchestrated effort. You can't randomly have that. Think about it. There are only 1.5% of the lawyers out there that are Black females. There are about 5% that are Black. So if you take 1.5% to the 5th power, so that's basically 1.5 times 1.5, and you do that 5 times, right? It rounds to a 0% chance of it happening naturally. That's statistics. That's probability. We can't ignore that, but CNN does. You know what just happened? By having an all-Black female Supreme Court in New York, it's going to usher in reparations when it's challenged at the Supreme Court level.
To the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls about these allegations, Reem Al-Salem, said that some of these allegations are not new. I want you to listen to what was said.
We must remember that these reports of sexual violence, especially I would say committed against Palestinian women, is one of many egregious human rights and humanitarian law violations that Palestinian women are being subjected to, including an unfolding genocide, occupation for decades, arbitrary killing, forced starvation, the use of reproductive violence in particular as a tool of war against them. And I would say that these allegations that we've heard also are not new. They've been pointed out by human rights organizations on the ground. My colleague, the Special Rapporteur on the occupied territories, in our last report also pointed out that there have been long-standing reports of the ill treatment and torture that Palestinian women and sexual assault that they have faced in Israeli detention. So we are not talking about something that has just emerged after October 7th.
UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem Al-Salem, speaking to CNN earlier.
All right, let's take a look at history. History of, okay, so, all right, we already played that one. Okay, this is what the rabbi is saying against Prince William's about the Hamas war.
That it's just for an end to the fighting in Gaza. Had was undoubtedly a political message with potential for all sorts of fallout. It's now being reported that Israel is dismayed by the prince's statement. According to the Telegraph, Israeli authorities are understood to have been caught off guard and believe the statement is naive. There are also reports that they do not want to risk entering a public row with the future king following his unprecedented royal intervention. Joining me now to discuss this is author Rabbi Shmuley Bertayek. Rabbi?
I have to go to commercial. This is PNN. Because where else on YouTube are you going to be able to see in real time Dante's Inferno of the world as the world is on fire 3.0? Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Max 35. It's a structural nano silver liquid. You take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or two a day, right? You swish it in your mouth, you gargle, you swallow, it neutralizes pathogens. It'll help to reduce that load on your immune system trying to fight pathogens if you can neutralize them early. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Links are in the description of all my videos, and get the Good Night formula. You need proper REM sleep. The average person needs 3 cycles of REM sleep a night to be able to consolidate memory and to detoxify the central nervous system. If you don't get the REM sleep, you're not detoxifying properly, and you're not consolidating memory. What that basically means is you're going to have memory loss, and you're going to actually have more toxins build up in your neurons. When that happens, you're going to have less mental acuity, and you're going to age mentally faster. So get the REM sleep. If you're not getting 3 REM cycles a night, you're having problems sleeping, you need to go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Good Night formula. Take it to get that 3 REM cycles of sleep. You're going to feel well rested. You're going to be detoxifying the central nervous system. Your cells outside of the central nervous system will also go through a detoxification if you get the proper sleep. And you'll have more energy, and you'll have better mental acuity, and you'll have memory consolidation. If you're not consolidating memory, don't you think that your dendrites will recede? Probably. So why don't you go to my store and get the Good Night formula? Getting a good gut biome is really important on overall health. So please go to my store and get the pre and probiotic to repopulate your gut properly so you can have the proper absorption, you have the proper stool consistency, you have this proper communication between your gut and your liver and your gut and your brain. If you have a bad gut biome, you're not going to be healthy, and you're going to probably increase the chances of colon cancer. So go to my store and get the pre and probiotic. I have it in a powdered form. I also have it in a capsule form. So some people prefer taking the powder. I take the powder and mix it with my food. You can also mix it with water, or you can just take the capsules. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And lastly, get the easy to digest multivitamin that I have on my store. You need multivitamins. Why? Because there's minerals and vitamins that are cofactors for enzymes. So if you have the proper concentration of those minerals and vitamins, you have the proper concentration for the cofactors to have the proper enzymatic activity for your metabolism. If you're short on some of these, then your enzyme activity will be less productive. It will be subpar. So to have a good running body, you need to take a multivitamin. So please go to my store and get this multivitamin and add it to your health protocol. back to the news. This is PNN.
It looks like Israel was blindsided here by the future king's comments, which essentially amounted to calling for a ceasefire.
Rita, I wish that Prince William knew some of the history, I'm sure he does, of his own great-grandfather, King George VI, because when he was the leader of Great Britain, he sanctioned the carpet bombing of entire German cities. We're talking Essen, Cologne, Berlin, Saxony, where civilians were deliberately targeted. This isn't in the time of Genghis Khan. This is in the time of his grandparents. Now, and of course, his grandmother served in the actual military as the heir to the throne. Now, let's be clear. The United States during the Second World War never bombed at night, even though it would have protected their pilots. They used during the day, daytime precision bombing, something called the Norden bomb sight, which was the second greatest secret of the war after the atomic bomb, precision bombing. But the British didn't care. They said, we're going to stop the Nazis once and for all completely, because they represent such a terrible evil that unless we carpet bomb the entire country, we're never going to see peace in our time. And they never apologized for it. Israel uses the American daytime precision bombing, losing hundreds of its soldiers when, of course, its air force could flatten Gaza. And here comes the Prince of Wales and says, why doesn't everybody like...
Rabbi, get your facts straight. Israel is firing weapons at night, too. So they're not doing just daytime precision. I mean, maybe he's misspeaking, or maybe he doesn't fully convey that. I don't know, but Israel is shooting at night too.
And are real smart, and also together and give up the fighting. I'll tell you why, Prince William. You have a wife. You wouldn't want to see anything happen to her. Do you know that 300-400 women were shot in the vaginas, their breasts cut off, played like with a volleyball with the terrorists? Do you know that children were decapitated, people burned alive? So if there were a ceasefire, Hamas says, we're going to do this again and again and again until every last Jew on earth is dead, which is why Prince William's grandfather, George VI, told Winston Churchill, bomb and do whatever you need to do to stop Britain from being annihilated. And we haven't even employed in Israel these things. So I just wish Prince William was a little bit more knowledgeable of the history.
Well, I agree with a lot of what the rabbi has to say, since, he was the rabbi to Michael Jackson. But, the thing is, Rabbi, it's not just the precision bombing / non-precision bombing in World War II. It is also this concept of a modern construct of what we call Palestine, the Palestinians. That's a modern construct that came from UK. All right. So, the UK didn't really have a real strong stance on this long 3,000-year arc of history of the region with the Jews and its covenant, and instead used a new modern construct to kind of try to create some sort of stability for the oil market at that time. All right, the Palestinians is a modern invention as a state. Same thing with Ukraine. It's a kind of a modern construct. It's much more complicated in terms of what Ukraine really is. So it's not just the precision, non-precision concept. And I would agree with you. And the other thing is that I would take it even one step further, Rabbi Shmuley. All right? Part of the problem that we have in modern warfare is it's too precision. Sometimes it needs to be less precise, so there's more collateral damage, so the society understands more of the will to try to end it. If it's too precise, then, you know, it's a Kindler machine gun hand, right? And 1,000 points of light from George Bush Sr. Sometimes you need that destruction to get war to end. If it's too precise, too surgical, it just goes on, and it's actually more costly. Each weapon is, you know, a dumb bomb is, you know, a few, you know, maybe, you know, a few hundred or a couple $1,000s. You use these precision weapons and they're in the millions. So you probably get more bang for your buck with a dumb bomb.
Well, beyond that,
unseen threats can lurk undetected in your hybrid cloud environment.
our cash balance is really healthy. I didn't do that. Well, beyond that, it's just unusual for a royal who is going to be king to get involved. They are supposed to be apolitical, and the late queen was always apolitical. You really had no idea where she stood on so many issues, and that's the way it's supposed to be because they're not elected officials. Now, Rabbi, you just recently had a panel discussion on my predecessor, Piers Morgan's program with Norman Finkelstein, who is a staunch critic of Israel and Zionism. He made some truly hideous comments, I've got to say, celebrating October 7. But the discussion you had with him on that program got really heated, it got ugly, and now you've come under fire for being too emotional and attacking Finkelstein personally. Do you regret that? I know this is just storming all over social media. Tell me about why you got so heated with this.
If anything,
Because I saw even Piers Morgan. I saw even Piers Morgan have a go at you.
Yeah, I actually think that Piers Morgan's a gentleman, and the reason why he wrote what he wrote on X that really got too personal with him was to protect Norman Finkelstein, because he was so obliterated in that debate. He was so embarrassingly demolished. First of all, his entire debating style is this droning monotone that puts you into a coma, and then like a prize fighter who's about to be knocked out, he kind of wants to run out the clock, so he tries to dominate the debate. If anything, I'd wait too easy on that.
Finkelstein is an intellectual, but he's part of that whole liberal Jewish side. And this is the problem. Finkelstein would prefer the actual, that kind of crowd that gravitates to him, that's Jewish, that's ultra liberal, all right? They're the crowd that basically doesn't know much about the Torah. Their children don't know how to read Hebrew. Their children have probably never read the full 5 books of Moses, let alone any of the other texts that, you know, came, you know, from, you know, the rabbis. And the deep understanding of Torah principles, let alone follow any of the basic tenets of Judaism, like Shabbos or kosher. That's the Finkelstein crowd. That actually, if you keep on going down that road, you're going to actually have nothing but secular Jews that don't know anything about their religion.
Let's be clear about who Norman Finkelstein is. He wrote a book that said that we use the 6 billion Jews who were gassed to death in the Holocaust. We choose to use it today only to make money. We use it to shake down Switzerland, to shake down Germany, and to get giant payments from Swiss banks. If that isn't disgusting enough, on October 7th, hours into the attack, he actually wrote that every fiber of my being is celebrating the attack on the Israelis.
What he said was bad enough. We don't need to put any mayonnaise on it. It was pretty bad.
He directly referenced the child in the children's faces. Now, what you're saying is what his defense was. He's saying, I did say that every 5 of my being celebrating this, but I did not know that beyond 50 Jews were murdered. So let's say it was 50, Rita. Let's say only 10 women were shot in the vagina, 10 Jewish men were decapitated, and only 20 Jewish children were burned to death. So he's saying then it would have been okay. That was actually his defense to Piers Morgan. Norman Finkelstein, we were only talking about him for one reason. Because if Jews are news, which they are, according to the classic journalistic idiom, then Jewish anti-Semites get the brightest headlines. He's a Jewish Jew hater, and therefore he gets the most news. Now, he actually said in an interview in 2016 that he gets paid for all these lectures to attack Israel. And he actually said that he's upset at BDS because they said Norman Finkelstein is a nobody. The Jews don't care about him anymore. He said, I used to get 40 paid lectures a year. Now I only get 4. That's why he keeps on upping the ante. Every year he needs to say something more outrageous on Piers Morgan or any other show in order to keep on bringing in the cash. So, and I want to be clear about that. So when he said October 7th, and he was celebrating it, this is all in the hope that he'll get on TV and we will talk about it. That doesn't excuse, however, the barbarity of what he said, the monstrosity of what he said. He called Israel a satanic state from hell. He said that Israel comes from the boils of hell. He accused us Jews 5 separate times of genocide. He started in 1982 in the war in Lebanon.
That is well documented. His history of standing with Holocaust deniers and saying all sorts of terrible stuff. I am not disputing any of that.
But how bad are we at genocide? If we tried it 5 times and we failed, and we Jews kind of suck at genocide, we need to read like the Dummy's Guide to Genocide, because we've tried it 5 times, and in the entire Arab-Israeli conflict, since in 75 years, about 130,000 people have died. As far as Gaza is concerned, 1 million residents have been added to Gaza since 1967 when Israel took control of it. So if a genocide means that the population grows by double what it was getting, that's not a genocide. This is a blood libel. It's the same thing as saying that Jews drink the blood of Christian children, that Jews poison the wells of Europe. He is absolutely guilty of blood libel. So not only do I
This is what I mean about the liberal academic Jew and how the ultra liberals gravitate to them. It's usually through their intellectualism, they try to intellectualize why they don't want to be real practicing Jews, which is problematic. And everyone could understand why. If you don't understand the statement I just made, you're probably an ultra liberal.
They said, I went way too easy on him. I regret that I wasn't tougher on him. And the Jewish community is saying that I should have been much tougher. Because you know what? We're tired of disgusting pigs like Norman Finkelstein who say Jews love blood. He's the word bloodlust. We love to murder. We love to kill. We're vampires. We like drinking blood. He's
Rabbi
disgusting.
Shmuley, we've run out of time, but I think you have made your point very clear indeed. Rabbi Shmuley Bertay, thank you so much for your time this evening.
World's going to hell. Dante's Inferno, not Detente. Okay, let's okay, so we played those. Now what's the next one I want to do? This one is Russia attacks Kiev.
There's nothing more powerful than you.
Marks 2 years.
Making your thing happen. Really going for it. Doing business on your terms.
Running. Targets in the port city of Odessa have been hit, killing 1 person. 3 others were seriously injured. The anniversary has been marked by a meeting of the UN Security Council, which was told by the Secretary General that the conflict was an open wound at the heart of Europe.
I'm gonna roll back this picture. Maybe you can see it. And people know about the Security Council, and you have this kind of like C shape, right? But what's so weird? I've always found this kind of almost combination of satanic and technological. All right. CERN-ish in a way. Is you have the camera right in the center, and they have it in a wrapped, you know, with a cloth. It almost looks like, you know, some sort of garment that this tripod's on. The camera's on a tripod, and then there's a cloth wrapped around it, so it's almost as if it's a body, and the camera is like this one eye, you know, and it'll track, you know, so someone that's speaking, it'll go and to that speaker, right, and move around. So it's moving around. My understanding is how it works is it moves around that seat, the seating arrangement. So it's almost like this one eye body system. And so you have the security console all sitting, and the centroid, the center point of that is this one-eyed structure that kind of looks human. It's human-esque in a way when you look at it. I just find that really odd. Very 1984. Very, I don't know, demonic in a way. Maybe other people have seen that, you know, and have felt the same thing. I don't know.
Security Council, which was told by the Secretary General that the conflict was an open wound at the heart of Europe. And in the last hour, the EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has praised the extraordinary resistance of the people of Ukraine as she arrived in Kyiv. She was travelling alongside the Prime Minister of Italy, seen here, as well as Canada and Belgium. Let's take you back to the scene live in Kyiv as the country marks the second anniversary of the conflict. Well, Vincent McAvenny has this report.
2 years on from the biggest attack on a European nation since the Second World War, the UK is marking the anniversary by reaffirming its commitment to Ukraine. The government has pledged an additional £245 million towards producing artillery shells for Ukraine and announced further sanctions on Russia. The Prime Minister stating Britain is prepared to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to help Ukraine achieve victory. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has also said President Vladimir Putin's cowardice and barbarity would not prevail. But it's faltering US funding, which is stalling Ukraine's efforts, something the Foreign Secretary is pushing at the UN in New York.
Thank you. If we allow this brutal dictator in Europe to redraw boundaries by force, to invade other countries and to get away with it, no country will be safe. And we know from our history that if we allow that to happen, the cost when we eventually have to intervene and stop them is so much greater.
A $60 billion military aid package is currently being blocked in Congress by far-right Republicans, but President Biden is determined to continue support.
Remember, the United States pulled together a coalition of more than 50 nations to support Ukraine. We unified and expanded NATO. We can't walk away now. And that's what Putin is betting on. He's betting on we're going to walk away.
Thank you so much for President in a virtual meeting with G7 leaders later today. For much of the past 2 years, he's lobbied leaders, parliaments, and peoples around the world for their support. Whilst morale might now be faltering both at home and abroad for the president, it's clear the Ukrainian people, despite the destruction and loss of the past 2 years, aren't ready to give up their country. Vincent McAvenny, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined now by David Fisher, the head of the delegation for Ukraine at the International Federation of the Red Cross. Thanks for joining us here on BBC News. David, you're in Kyiv at the moment. You have worked throughout this conflict. I want to begin by asking you where you see things for the humanitarian situation 2 years on.
Thank you for the opportunity. The needs are still very high. This is still an ongoing humanitarian emergency. Almost half of Ukrainians are still in urgent need of food, of medical assistance, of employment support. There have been huge mental health impacts, as you can imagine, from the constant threats of bombardment, mostly around the front, but also elsewhere in the country, even here in Kyiv. 4 out of 5 people report some kind of mental trauma. Many people are affected even far from the front lines because of the impact on the economy and the overall sort of displacement that has happened afterwards, including for basic health services. So we still see a very strong level of humanitarian need here in the country.
And David, how does this impact your teams who are working on this ongoing conflict as well? I mean, I was reading that you visited the team in Kharkiv recently. Just tell us more about that visit.
Sure. Yeah. So we visited the team in their small office. The windows are still boarded up. They told us, in the early days, how frantic it was. Armored cars rolling just in front, bombs falling, shrapnel coming into the windows. Their entire team sleeping on the floor of their operations center night after night. 2 years on, they're still working very, very hard. They told me they're tired, but they cannot be tired. They're there to help their communities, and we've seen this with volunteers for the Ukraine Red Cross Society around the country. This real determination to help their communities to cope.
And what is the new normal for so many people in Ukraine? I mean, we now hear about everyone knowing where their shelter is, having to deal with strikes that still continue, even though in some ways global attention has dimmed on this.
That's certainly true. People have found ways to cope. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. With constant air raid sirens, sometimes people run for shelter, sometimes they don't. Many children are still out of school. This is years on because they had the same experience after COVID. There's only a third of children who are back in school. Many people have now run through their savings. This is true both for displaced people, but also people who have fled the country in other parts of Europe. And so even as, in many ways, the conflict has become slower in its big changes, the individual emergency for many people is getting higher. Where can they get employment? Where can they get sort of essential support?
Okay, David Fisher, head of delegation for Ukraine from the IFRC. Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at the next video. And Times Radio. Sometimes I like the radio show here.
Hi everyone, Mark Barden here at Sandy Hook Promise.
God, I'm so sick and tired of Sandy Hook.
On December 14th, 2012,
Yeah.
my 7-year-old son Daniel was shot to death.
A very aggressive rush. We are in a very serious position. So supporting Ukraine is not just a nice thing to do with our spare cash. It's actually fundamental to the security of this country. And our politicians need to speak louder about it. The media needs to speak louder about it. We need to get this real and actually focus on it. This is a late 1930s moment. And if we don't react to it, we're doomed not to learn the lessons of history.
What do you think when you hear Lord Cameron? How fertile is the ground upon which his words fall? 2 years ago, they might have been very fertile, but as he said himself, there's a sense of fatigue, a sense that maybe a compromise might be attractive. And let's remember, he was there at the UN General Assembly, and Russia has friends there.
Yes, you asked the question.
Let's go to commercial because this is PNN and I have to do some product placement. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the lozenges that I have. These are structural nano silver lozenges. This one's in Manuka honey, and you get a 21 count in this bag to soothe your throat and to neutralize pathogens. All right. Now we are near the tail end of the cold season, but we're going to be going into spring in the United States, and there's going to be allergens and there's going to be irritation. And the best way to try to neutralize that is to get these lozenges and to use the structural nano silver liquid. Take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or two. But to use these lozenges and drops. So I also have it in blueberry, the structural nanosilver drops. They're in 100 count because they're slightly smaller. And I also have honey and lemon drops in 100 count. Structural nanosilver help to soothe your throat and to neutralize the pathogens. And then I also have a new product on the store, elderberry zinc lozenges, silver lozenges, right? So please go to the store. This is also in a 21 count. Get a couple bags. Make sure you have enough for your house, your household, as we move into the spring season, and you're going to have pollen floating around and may irritate your throat. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the lozenges and the drops that I offer. In addition, I also have structural nanosilver gel. What this does is it'll neutralize pathogens. You put it on your hands, you can put it around your mouth and around your nose, lightly coat your nostrils, around your eyes, around your ears, right? It will stay active for 5 hours to neutralize pathogens. In addition, you can use it as a skincare product. You can put it on a cut. You can put it on acne. You can put it on a minor burn or an abrasion. And there will be what you'll notice is that the cut or the abrasion will heal about 1/3 of the time quicker. Okay, so it's a skincare also, not just neutralizing pathogens. There are people out there that you can put it on your skin, on your body, on your face, around your neck, right before you go to bed. And then when you wake up, then you exfoliate the gel off of your skin, and you do this for, let's say, a week or so, and you'll notice that your skin's tighter, it's clearer, and it's healthier. All right. So you can use this as a skincare product. It's dual purpose. I like providing things to my customers that have dual purpose, high quality dual purpose. And this is a perfect example where there's a dual purpose skincare plus to neutralize pathogens. So please go to the store and get the structural nanosilver gel. Back to the news, because this is PNN and we have Dante's Inferno, not Detente.
Fertile is the ground on which his words might fall. I think it's us to actually make sure that there's plenty of fertilizer on that ground, because what David Cameron is saying is absolutely spot on. If Vladimir Putin conceives that he has won in any shape or form in Ukraine, is extraordinarily dangerous for the security of the rest of the West, and particularly of Europe. David Cameron particularly referenced Moldova and the Baltic states, and of course, he's absolutely right. Moldova, a little independent state, already has Russian soldiers stationed in it there. No security forces of their own, but the Baltic states are NATO members, and should there be an attack on any of those, that would be an attack on all the rest of us under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. So David Cameron's words are very wise. They're the words that many of us have been saying for quite some time, that we absolutely need to go on supporting Ukraine to make sure that in no shape or form does Russia win in Ukraine, and that Ukraine is fighting a battle for the security of Europe, and we should absolutely stand foursquare behind them.
You may not have seen the front page of tomorrow's Independence, a picture of some soldiers and a very heavy gun firing artillery shells, and the headline, "If Ukraine loses, the West is next." And then they give us a number of figures. At least 10,582 Ukrainian civilians dead, 19,875 injured, an estimated 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed in 2 years of fighting. And one wonders just how many Russian soldiers have been killed in President Putin's meat grinder strategy. It's been a very expensive adventure for him. And given the cost, do you really think that if he did manage to keep some part of Ukraine, he'd be tempted to go into a NATO country, given the apocalyptic cost that would visit upon his country and his people?
Well, you ask a very good question. I haven't seen tomorrow's Independent. I'm not sure whether you've seen tomorrow's Express, but there is an article in tomorrow's Express in which I and my co-author of the book we published in the autumn makes it very clear that the cost of fighting a war is disastrous, but there is a price on deterrence.
And the big question is whether NATO members, and particularly NATO members in Europe, are willing to pay the price for deterrence. Now, NATO has a 2% line of GDP to be spent on defence by its members. Now, that's not a target, that's a minimum amount to be spent. But frankly, it's not enough to spend that amount on our defence to deter an aggressive country under the leadership of Vladimir Putin from our own security. So we've got to get really real. We've got to get grown up about this. While Vladimir Putin is leading a very aggressive Russia, we should be fearful for our own security in Europe, notwithstanding other threats.
When you build your online store with GoDaddy, it's easy to sell everywhere your customers shop.
Notwithstanding other threats more widely across the world.
Looking at the front page of the Telegraph, Britain to spend £250 million on artillery shells for Ukraine, and Ben Wallace, somebody who you know, the former Defence Secretary, calling on BAE Systems to step up operations at its Sunderland factory, producing 155mm shells. And then we've got Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba warning EU counterparts this week his armed forces would need 2.5 million artillery shells in 2024. To what extent would European and allied leaders be more keen and less fatigued if they felt Ukraine was making more progress than they have done thus far since the much vaunted counteroffensive last year?
Henry, don't criticise their counteroffensive.
Not criticising them, but I'm just talking about.
Don't criticise their counteroffensive. Yeah. Criticise, if you will, the speed and enthusiasm by which NATO and Western countries were prepared to give them the equipment and the ammunition that they needed in the early part of last year. While we were dithering about whether we'd give them F-16s, Challenger 2s, Leopard 2s, the Russians weren't sitting on their backsides doing nothing. They were developing really comprehensive, deep and lengthy lines of defence. So when it came eventually to the point when the Ukrainians were prepared to launch their counteroffensive, they were launching themselves against really well-prepared defensive positions. It's not surprising they found it difficult to get through. So we've got to get realistic about this. Now, you mentioned the supply of artillery ammunition. It is a fact today that Russian ammunition factories are working 24/7 on 3 shifts around the clock. Question, how many ammunition factories do we have in this country, and what sort of shift regime are they on? We are not taking this seriously. Now, here's an historical fact, just very briefly. We had an aggressor in the 1930s, Hitler, and we chose to appease him until far too late did we begin to rearm. In this country, in 1935, we spent less than 3% of GDP on defence. In 1939, appeasement having failed, that shot up to 18%. In 1940, when we were fighting for our very survival, it was 46%. That's the disastrous cost of fighting a war. What price deterrence? Actually, currently, spending 2.3% of our GDP on defence is not giving us the deterrent contribution that we need. It should be 3, 4 or 5% as it was in the Cold War. We're joking with ourselves if we think actually we're serious about facing down Vladimir Putin. This is a serious moment in our history, and whether we've got a general election coming up and social issues at home, health, education, all the rest of it are important, this is a really serious matter. And our politicians better blooming well wake up.
And when you criticise our politicians, are you talking about UK politicians or politicians across Western Europe and indeed NATO leaders? I'm wondering where we are in the league table of support for Ukraine when you look at our colleagues, counterparts, partners in the EU and NATO. Boris Johnson claimed we were leading.
Looking at the 2% figure, which NATO wants its members to spend, only 10 or 11 or maybe now 12 have reached that figure. Big countries like France and Germany are still below that figure. Now, we are above it at about 2.3%, but then actually you include creative gap accounting, things like pensions, like my pension being added into that, which actually I'm afraid I add nothing to military capability today. But we've got to get serious about it. Our defence budget is around about £50 billion a year. we're priding ourselves in this country that we have given Ukraine just under 5 billion over the last 2 years. Well, we've given them 5 billion. We're spending 50 billion a year. We're spending 180, 190 on health and social security. Just where are the priorities and what is serious and what really matters? Frankly, our politicians are kidding themselves if they're looking after the wider interests of this country and the wider interests of the security of Europe.
We know how unpopular support for Ukraine is among some Republican factions on Capitol Hill. What about here? How ready would people be to see an increase in taxes in order to boost the defense budget, particularly if it was to help fund the Ukrainian war effort? Generosity towards the refugees from Ukraine notwithstanding.
I mean, the big thing here is we're not just being generous in terms of overseas aid to Ukraine. What we actually absolutely have to understand, and our politicians and our media, and I say again, and our media, has to get the message across to our people that the security of Western Europe is being fought for by the people of Ukraine at the present moment. And if they fail, we then stand in a very, very perilous position with an aggressive Russia. If Russia was to push through Belarus to Lithuania, to the Kaliningrad pocket, that's actually an attack on the rest of NATO. That's violated Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. We are in a very serious position. So supporting Ukraine is not just a nice thing to do with our spare cash. It's actually fundamental to the security of this country. And our politicians need to speak louder about it. The media needs to speak louder about it. We need to get this real and actually. We need to get this real and actually focus on it. This is a late 1930s moment. And if we don't react to it, we're doomed not to learn the lessons of history.
And Lord Dante, can we pivot from what's happening in Ukraine to what's happening in Gaza and, of course, Israel? Because it's not just Ukraine that says it's on the front line defending Western values. Israel says the same thing about its battle with Hamas in Gaza. When you look at the Israeli defense strategy and the plan outlined today by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for Israel to remain in Gaza as part of a long-term security settlement, what do you make of that?
Well, the situation in Gaza between Hamas and Israel is clearly very concerning. There is no getting away from the fact that the events of the 7th of October were an outrage as far as Israel is concerned. Hamas is sworn to destroy Israel. Israel has the absolute right, guaranteed by the international community, to exist. The big issue, and this is the difficult issue, is that within what we understand as the just war concept, there are two issues. Is it right to fight? And are they fighting right? Well, yes, of course, Israel is right to fight, but are they fighting right? Well, with 29,000 Gazan citizens killed in the last 4 months, that's an horrific number of people. So inevitably, popular opinion has swung and is swinging further against Israel. But I can put this back in the wider conversation that we were having. As concerning as the issues in the Middle East are, frankly, it's up to Iran to dial this up or dial this down. Iran supports Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, but does Iran really want a war with America and a war with the West? No, it doesn't. So I'm less concerned about what's going on in the Middle East. I'm less concerned about threats by China to Taiwan. But what really keeps me awake, if I choose to stay awake at night, is what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, because that's in the interests of all of us here in Western Europe.
And how appalled are you by the prospect of a President Trump 2.0 from January 20th or whatever, 2025? The former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, would be cock-a-hoop. Well, how would you respond?
Well, I know Liz Truss is a fellow resident of Norfolk, but I'm afraid I don't share her views on that. I would hope very much that the American judicial system, with so many civil and criminal charges out against Donald Trump, will actually have debarred him from being a presidential candidate come November. I think your prospect of having him back in the White House is an appalling prospect, and one that I don't look forward to one little bit.
All right, so we got that one. Let's do one more here. This one is Russia unleashes its strategic weapons to push NATO back to Ukraine, back in Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. The 2 years of the Russia-Ukraine war has changed the security calculus of Europe. And Moscow has used the Ukrainian battlefield to test out some of its most advanced weapon systems. First announced by Vladimir Putin in March 2018, Russia's strategic weapons, some of which that have been used on the battlefield, have been in a direct head-to-head contest with the best weapons that NATO has managed to field against the Russian war machine. In the last 2 years, the fortunes on the battlefield have swung on more than one occasion. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was originally meant to be over in 3 days, but it has now entered into its 3rd year. The geopolitical realities on the ground have also changed. Ukraine is increasingly fighting without Western military assistance. There are loud promises that the NATO military alliance would not let Ukraine sink. And the other reason why military assistance from the United States is stopped is due to internal politics in the United States. More than any other reason, wars on the battlefield are decided on the basis of technological superiority. And it is here that Russia appears to have gained the upper hand. Our next report gets you the details. This is the reality of war. For leaders who sit in air-conditioned rooms and make loud statements, this is the desperate struggle of the battlefield. Survive longer than your enemy. This dramatic footage that was released by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry shows a convoy of Russian tanks being ambushed and destroyed on the battlefield. But this video depicts just one incident of the battlefield, as the larger picture of the war that is playing out at the moment for Ukraine is very different. This is the scale of the devastation that has been wreaked on Ukraine. City after Ukrainian city, town after town, has been depopulated, and the buildings here reduced to empty, burnt-out sheds. Can you imagine what this Ukrainian city must have looked like before the onslaught by the Russians? In the city of Avdiivka, that was most recently captured by Moscow, the Russian soldiers are carrying out mopping operations. The NATO weapons left behind by the fleeing Ukrainian soldiers are being gathered up. The mood in Kiev has soured. The heroic resistance against the Russian onslaught is now giving way to a bitter sense of betrayal. The Ukrainian forces are outgunned and outnumbered. Vyacheslav, a Ukrainian artillery commander stationed at Chasiv Yar in the Donetsk region, will give you a sense of what is happening on the battlefield.
We lack ammunition. There is very little of it. Too few is given to us. We often look at the video feeds of our drone pilots. They show us pictures from the front line. A lot of Russians try to attack our positions. If we had more ammunition, we could have stopped them. Since we lack ammunition, we have nothing to work with. We see the target, we can hit it, but we have nothing to do with it.
For the Ukrainians, everything hinges on American military assistance, and it is precisely this which doesn't appear to be forthcoming.
The European Union should help Ukraine if they think it is such a dire crisis. Why does the American public have to constantly fund this crap?
people fought so bravely and heroically. They put so much on the line. The idea that now, if you run out of ammunition, you walk away.
What about the American policy right after the Berlin Wall falling, becoming more belligerent in poking the bear, even before Putin came into office? This catastrophe in Ukraine was the cause of the national security state and its failed strategic policy.
I find it absurd. I find it unethical. I find it just country that we are as a country. So I'm going to fight to the end. Get them the ammunition they need and the capacity they need.
So is it just American politics that has stopped more US aid for Ukraine? According to military experts, that may not be the complete truth. The last 2 years of the offensives and the counteroffensives that have played out on the battlefield point to a glaring reality that the Western leaders are not willing to publicly admit. In a contest of conventional weapons, Russia appears to have gained an upper hand that at this moment has made the Ukrainian pushback to recover its lost territories is almost impossible. Russia has been using AI-powered missiles to autonomously detect, track, and destroy Ukrainian targets. And all this without any human involvement and direction. Russia has also extensively used the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles to strike targets even when they've been guarded by some of the most advanced Western anti-air defense systems, such as the Patriot missiles.
Now, it's really important to pay attention to what I have to say, okay? There's a historical context. During the American Civil War in 1861 to 1864, during that period of time, there was something called the Gatling gun that was invented. It was barely used in the battlefield, but it was kind of like the early days of the machine gun, okay? So it would shoot rapidly, right? By just twisting a barrel that had a bunch of rifle barrels connected to it. I think there were 12. Could have been, maybe some of them were 6, but and you would turn it and it would shoot bullets out of these barrels. And it would deplete rapidly and then you would reload, right? It wasn't used on the battlefield that much, but it was a technology that was just starting. Another thing that was just starting was longer term trench warfare, where a side would start to dig in and it was hard to break the line, right? That was near the tail end of the war, all right? And these cannons became larger, all right, to be able to break through defenses, all right, and to help protect certain regions. So it was offensive and defensive capability with these larger cannons. This is all happening around 18 near the tail end, so around in 1863 and 1864. Okay. The echo of the machine gun and trench warfare was in the Civil War, but wasn't heavily implemented because of just the dynamics that were happening at the time. Fast forward from 1864 all the way to 1914, World War I, and now you have really mechanized warfare. Everything is machine gun, right? And it's trench warfare. And it was a bloodbath during World War I. So the point that I'm making here is that each war, what comes out of it is a technology that may have not been heavily used in the era that it emerged from. But what will happen is that it will be implemented in the era of the next big conflict. The Gatling gun wasn't really used that much in the Civil War, but the machine gun was used heavily in World War I. That's my point. Airplanes were used a little bit in World War I, right? But it was heavily used in World War II. Tanks started in World War I and were heavily used in World War II. There was a submarine that was not very functional during even the Civil War. But submarines start to become an important feature in World War I, and especially in World War II, because of the improvement of the technology. And so we emerged out of the Middle Eastern War, right after post 9/11. We emerged out of that, and now we have drone warfare and autonomous warfare, better smart bombs. All right. And that is the technology that's going into World War III. Okay. And maybe even tactical nukes, right? Which is the tail end of World War I. Or I'm sorry, the tail end of World War II, where we have the nuclear age. Right. So right at, near the tail end of World War II, we have the nuclear age. And that can be part of World War III. All right. So, but there was so much destruction that could be had with nuclear war that it led to certain types of strategic policies where there was this Cold War. All right. It didn't turn hot. And in some areas there were proxy wars, but it didn't end up with a nuclear detonation, all right, during the Cold War. So on the battlefield, right, that we know. So the whole point here is that there's a technology that emerges from an era that goes into the next war era, and that will be a heavily used technology. So in World War III, this drone warfare is going to be really, really big. All right. And autonomous and AI and all this stuff, right? And so we are now moving towards an era where a lot of things can happen very rapidly. And you don't have kind of that human discernment that may be important to de-escalate situation. All right, so just keep that in mind.
In September 2023, Russia deployed its most advanced nuclear missile, the Satan II for combat, with Putin saying that this missile would make all Russian adversaries think twice before staging any attack on Russia. On the 13th of February this year, Russia used its Zircon hypersonic missile for a strike on Kiev. On the 7th of October in 2023, Russia tested another of its strategic weapons called the WWIII, a weapon that the West calls Skyfall. This is a type of a missile that the West simply does not have. This is not just a cruise missile that can carry a nuclear warhead, but instead is a cruise missile that uses atomic energy for its propulsion and that can also deliver a nuclear payload. This video released by the Russian Defense Ministry from the testing site of the new weapon system will give you a glimpse of what this new missile is capable of. Another strategic weapon that Russia is currently developing is a nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed underwater vehicle that can trigger nuclear tsunamis which can devastate entire coastlines. Called the Poseidon, the West is nothing that is remotely analogous to this. So while the West, on the second anniversary of the Ukraine war, is scrambling to put together enough resources to back Ukraine, Vladimir Putin was busy showing off.
Now, do you understand why I said that the national security state is dangerous? Now, do you see it? And the reason why we need to kill it?
Russia's new Tu-160M nuclear-capable strategic bomber. The giant swing plane that has been codenamed the Blackjacks by NATO is a modernized version of the Cold War-era nuclear bomber of the Soviet Union. If you want peace, then prepare for war is a military maxim that was put forth by the 4th century Roman military expert Flavius Vegetius Renatus. And Russia under Putin appears to be busy building its next generation of weapons, while the West has little clarity on its strategy on how to proceed in the Ukraine war. Yemen's food.
Let me go to commercial. This is PNN. And where else are you going to get the latest and greatest pontification about how the world is going up in flames? It's going to get really hot out there when we go to the World on Fire 3.0. So you're going to need deodorant. So please go to my store and get the all-natural deodorant from Rainbow Herbals. We have it in citrus and peppermint, lavender tea tree. So we have 2 different versions. It's made from essential oils from the Himalayas. You use it as a deodorant, but like I said, I like providing products to my audience that has dual purpose. This will help to detoxify your body because of the natural ingredients. So please go to the store and get the deodorant bars. Get a couple deodorant bars. I have it in citrus, and the other version is peppermint lavender tea tree. It's for males and females, and it will help to detoxify your body. Use it every day. It has no aluminum in it, all right, and it's sodium free. Baking soda, let me rephrase that. Sodium free and baking soda free. I have structural nano silver soaps. Help to neutralize pathogens. They're very high quality soaps. I have this in charcoal tea tree, also in lavender and peppermint. What's this one? Oatmeal spice. So please go to the store and get a couple bars of the soap. It's a very high quality product, and you'll be impressed. It's important to boost up your immune system, all right? We're going to start seeing a lot of bad news out there in terms of the economy, in terms of jobs, in terms of conflict, right? Domestically and internationally. And you need to boost up your immune system, all right? Especially through the aftershock of the crisis that we went through in 2020. A good way to do that is to get magnesium and zinc supplements from my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video, and boost up your immune system. Take magnesium and zinc every day. If you're not feeling well, take a double dose. Let's go back to how the world is going up in flames.
Announced on the 22nd of February that they are banning vessels linked to Israel, the United States, and the United Kingdom from the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Sea. To this effect, formal notices of the ban were sent by Houthi Humanitarian Operations Coordination Center to shipping insurers and firms operating in the region. In addition to this, they also pledged to use submarine drones against US ships, continuing and further escalating their attacks amidst the Israel-Gaza war. On the 19th of February, an American MQ-9 Reaper drone was shot down by the Houthis using a surface-to-air missile. Now, this is the second instance of an MQ-9 Reaper drone being shot down by the Houthis since the Israel-Gaza war erupted on the 7th of October. So how potent is the threat posed by the Houthis? And who is supplying the Houthis with some sophisticated weaponry. Our next point gets to the details.
Following the start of the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip last October, Iran-aligned Houthis started firing drones and missiles towards Israel, most of which were intercepted. Changing tactics in November, they started targeting Israeli flagged or operated ships or ships heading to the Israeli ports. Consequently, several shipping companies redirected their vessels around the southern tip of Africa, adding a further 3,000 to 3,500 nautical miles to their journeys, further delaying delivery times and incurring more costs. Almost 15% of global seaborne trade usually passes through the shortest shipping route between Europe and Asia. In response, the US and UK have carried out multiple rounds of airstrikes on the Houthi targets in Yemen. The United States, on the 17th of January, redesignated the Houthis a terrorist group. But the Houthis have remained defiant and the attacks on vessels have persisted. The attacks, Houthis say, are in solidarity with the Palestinians and in response to Israel's military operations in Gaza, which have killed almost 30,000 Gazans in 4 months. On Thursday, in 2 notices issued by the Houthis, they outlined a formalized ban in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Eden, and the
unconventional warfare from Iran will kill millions of people. So 30,000 is a lot less than millions. It's time to get the job done before we kick the can down the road and unconventional warfare really takes hold.
The ban affects vessels wholly or partially owned by Israeli, American, and British individuals or entities, as well as those sailing under their flags. Announcing an escalation in these attacks, Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi also said the group had introduced submarine weapons in their attacks.
We will continue with our operations and move towards an escalation. The operations aimed at supporting Gaza and standing in solidarity with the oppressed Palestinian people, as well as targeting Israeli targets in the occupied territories, have reached a total of 138 rockets. The supporting track for Gaza and operations in the Red Sea, Arabian Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait are also ongoing. In these operations, we are also heading towards an escalation in both intensity and type. This involves activating missiles, drones, and military boats, and the introduction of submarines, which is concerning for the enemy. The targeted ships in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea have reached 48 vessels. 48 ships have been targeted, which is a very significant number.
The same day, the US military's Central Command, or CENTCOM, said it conducted 4 self-defense raids against the Houthis, destroying 7 anti-ship cruise missiles, a mobile ballistic missile launcher, and an unmanned underwater drone. Israel's military also intercepted a target in the area of Red Sea after sirens blared, warning of incoming rockets and missiles in the southern tourist town of Eilat. Americans have accused Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of providing the Houthis with a growing arsenal of sophisticated weapons and training. US President Joe Biden has acknowledged that the American and British bombardment has so far failed in its objective of stopping attacks by the Houthis. With the announcement of the ban, the Houthis have underscored their defiance. The question now is, can America, when push comes to shove, defeat the Houthis, and will this fallout of the Israel-Hamas war end up destabilizing the Middle East?
On the 20th of February.
The reason why the nuclear fueled rocket, all right, not just a nuclear payload, but a nuclear fueled rocket, is so problematic to the American defense system is that it will be able to move around, all right, and be in well called dark zones where radar or defense systems are not deployed and kind of sneak around. All right. The old type of technology, or we'll just say the more conventional type of technology is that you have a continental ballistic missile that launches from the US that goes to, let's say, Russia or to China. And so there's the 6-minute, 8-minute window. All right. Another conventional mean is to have a sub floating around somewhere, right, underwater, and then either shoot from underwater or shoot from the surface, and then attack and be close to the shore to reduce that 6 to 8 minute window. Another method is to have bombers in the air, at regular intervals to be able to deploy, and they are kind of hugging the coastline in the international waters. All right, that's primarily our missile defense strategy and our offensive missile strategy. All right, when I mean missile defense strategy, I mean if Russia decided to shoot first, what we would do. All right. If you use the term missile defense strategy to shoot down missiles, that's a whole different discussion. Okay, so we have an offensive strategy with nuclear weapons, and what would be our defensive response is the better way to put it. That's not fueled, but those missiles are not fueled by nuclear propulsion. Now, the reason why nuclear propulsion was a game changer in the subsystems, right? The marine, submarine systems, was that it could be underwater for a long time and go anywhere and didn't have to resurface for long periods of time. So the silent service, right? So there were talks back in the 50s to have planes that would just float around in the sky, right? Not float, but fly, where they didn't need to be refueled. And they would just run on nuclear power. At that time, there were technological difficulties in terms of the durability of these planes, but also the concern that what happens if something goes wrong and a nuclear detonation takes place accidentally, some crash or it blows up in the sky. So they decided not to do that. But defense contractors and the Pentagon were thinking about doing things like this in the 1950s with planes. Okay. Now, with a nuclear propulsion system, which you do in outer space, but to go to moons and planets and to launch satellites and stuff way out there in the distance. So we do have the technology to do this. But this capability for Russia will allow for a missile to just have a lot of energy to kind of just float around, right? The problem comes in is what happens when an accident happens. All right. And for this missile to be, there's two ways this can be used. launch and evade radar or other means of detecting a missile launch, and then hit unexpectedly on the United States, or there's a signal that comes in, but it's seconds and there's no response time. You know, if the response time isn't set, 7 or 3, let's say if a rocket is going to hit, not a rocket, but a continental ballistic missile, conventional, is launched, is detected, you have about 7 minutes for it to impact. So you have about a 5-minute window of what you're going to do as a countermeasure. All right. What happens when the warning is only 2 seconds? What do you do? That's what Russia just put on the table here. And they can launch it, and it will evade the defense systems that we have, right? And then because of the supersonic, it could hit the United States in a very short amount of time, and it doesn't have to be a direct, typical trajectory for a intercontinental ballistic missile, right? And you don't need your subs right at the coastline to your enemy to launch these nuclear weapons. So let's say it takes an hour or 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours, and it's floating around, right? It's going in some sort of pattern, right? Determined by the AI, and then eventually gets to its target and hits it. And it's getting telemetry of weather patterns to try to prevent it from being deterred because of some sort of weather pattern. And the United States doesn't know it was launched 4 or 5 hours ago. And then all of a sudden, 2 seconds later, you know that it's there, and then it hits, and then a city's gone. That's the capability that they now have, or at least what they're saying they have. All right, so this is the reason why it changes the whole dynamic here. We wouldn't be at this crossroad if it wasn't for the national security state poking the bear and not integrating Russia when we could have for 3 decades. All right, so let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that in mind that we're at a dangerous crossroad here. Now, the drawback with this technology, right, is that as it's floating around, it could float around not just for fly around this technology from Russia. It doesn't just float around for 4 or 5 hours. It could maybe float around for several days. What happens if an accident happens? It blows up in the air or has some problem with its weather telemetry and it tries to evade the weather, but it blows off course or whatever and blows up or hits a country that it wasn't supposed to. And we have a nuclear detonation, quote, by accident. So there's and that was part of the reason why the United States didn't want to use these bombers, these large bombers that were holding nuclear weapons, using nuclear power engines. So it's going to be scary times.
The United Nations Security Council convened for an emergency meeting. The agenda of the meeting was the rapidly deteriorating security situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where fighting between the government forces and the M23 rebels is intensified. At the meeting, the United States issued a warning to both Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo that they must walk back from the brink of war. Kinshasa, the United Nations, and the Western nations have said that Kigali is actually supporting the rebels in a bid to control the vast mineral resources in the region, a charge that's been refuted by Kigali. Our next report gets you all the details.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo, formerly known as Zaire, is Africa's second largest country. The rich in valuable mineral resources, it ranks among the 5 poorest nations in the world. Compounding the problem for the impoverished nation is the insurgency in its east, which it has been battling for decades. It is estimated that more than 120 rebel groups are fighting with national armed forces for power, land, and valuable mineral resources. Preeminent among these is M23, a largely Tutsi rebel group linked with the neighboring Rwanda, though Kigali has repeatedly denied the charge. After several months of relative calm, intense fighting resumed last month around the city of Goma, the capital of the North Kivu province. At least 35 people have been killed and hundreds wounded in these clashes. Desperate civilians on foot, on motorbikes, or in cars moved from the towns and villages around Goma to take refuge in the city. Thousands of civilians have been caught in the crossfire and are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. On Tuesday, UN humanitarian agencies issued an appeal for financial aid to address the grave food insecurity situation.
So in terms of financing, as I said, we are asking for 2.6 billion, and this is to provide what we call multi-sectoral assistance to 8.7 million people. The first ticket item on the list is food security because of that mega food insecurity situation in the conflict zone of the DRC. So 1.2 billion out of the 2.6 is going to food security.
More than 1 million people are now in and around Goma after fleeing the fighting. The Congolese president, Felix Tshisekedi, who was re-elected in December, has struggled to bring an end to the cycle of violence despite his promises. Strongly condemning the escalating violence, the United States asked the M23 backers in Rwanda to remove sophisticated surface-to-air missiles that are threatening lives in the Congo's east. And in a stern warning, the United States urged both parties to explore the path of regional diplomatic efforts for lasting peace.
Rwanda and the DRC must walk back from the brink of war. Parties to the conflict and regional actors should immediately resume the Nairobi and Rwanda processes. These regional diplomatic efforts, not military conflict, are the only path toward a negotiated solution and sustainable peace.
Will Rwanda pay heed to these warnings and end all support for M23 rebels and pull its troops from Democratic Republic of Congo? Well, millions of lives are at stake and dependent on Rwanda's next move.
At least 26 combatants and an unconfirmed number of bystanders were killed in a tribal clash in Papua New Guinea's Highlands on 18th of February. Some police and cabinet officials put the death toll anywhere from 49 to 64, taking into account the fact that bodies are still being recovered. The military has in fact deployed as many as about 100 troops to the area, but they remain woefully outnumbered, outgunned, and ineffective. The incident in early hours of Sunday put an escalating internal security problem under the lens in the South Pacific island nation. Recently, the strategically vital island nation has garnered close military attention from the rival powers, the United States and China. Our next report gets more details.
Papua New Guinea is a diverse, developing, mostly rural nation of subsistence farmers. An Australian colony prior to gaining independence in 1975, the country is rich in resources including gold, nickel, and natural gas. As many as 839 languages are known to exist here, making it one of the most linguistically diverse nations in the world. Strategically significant, it is the most populous nation in South Pacific after Australia, with about 10 million people. Historically, however, it has struggled to contain escalating tribal violence and civil unrest in remote regions. Tribal warfare in Papua New Guinea's highlands is a centuries-old affair, which again came to the fore on the 8th.
Now, I know some people would disagree with me, but I'm going to say something that may be very profound to some. Perhaps the Georgia Guidestones were warning us about what the solution is after we go through the World on Fire 3.0.
February, with dozens of bloody bodies found along a remote stretch of road in the Inga province. Prime Minister James Marape expressed deep concern and called on warring tribes to lay down their arms.
Great concern for what is happening in Inga province. To lose one life, let alone many lives, does not evade our consciousness and our concern. As Prime Minister, I'm deeply moved by this. I'm very, very concerned. I'm very, very angry. I want to relate to youths who are holding guns up there. People outside who are sponsoring this, I will not be there to answer to you when you either die or when you face police and you respond to the rule of law.
Reportedly, a tribe, their allies, and mercenaries were on their way to attack a neighboring tribe when they were ambushed early Sunday morning. The incident occurred near the village of Wape Namada, which is about 600 kilometers northwest of the capital, Port Moresby. Police said the gunman had used a veritable armory, including SLR, AK-47, M4, AR-15, and M16 rifles, as well as pump-action shotguns and homemade firearms. Of late, automatic weapons and an influx of mercenaries have made these clashes between clans a far more deadly affair. How prepared are the police and security officials in Papua New Guinea to tackle these challenges?
Government don't take joy in losses. Every moment, life is being lost, lawlessness happens in the country. It costs to live the government, as we said. There'll be a time when police capacity will step up. At the moment, we have 500 personnel trained as we speak. We've already signaled to permanent training, not to be seasonal training, but training will go on every time. Every time. And police discipline requires that some go out, the officers come in.
Last month as well, on the 10th of January, the island nation had descended into lawlessness.
So you're seeing all the crazy stuff that's going on in Africa and Indonesia and all.
With a festering pay dispute. At least 15 people were killed in riots in the two biggest cities of Port Moresby and Lae as the crowds looted and burned shops. The scale of destruction was unprecedented in the past 50 years, with local newspapers dubbing it as the city's darkest day. Two major incidents in 2 successive months have highlighted the nation's huge internal security issues. It would be interesting to see how the island nation, located in a strategically significant part of South Pacific, deals with these challenges at a time when it is being courted by the United States, its ally Australia, and China seeking closer ties.
And without a wrap on this edition of World at War, if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback, or suggestions.
So that's my coverage for the news and how the world is on flames 3.0. Dante's Inferno versus Detente. So please make sure that you go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, get the great products that I offer to improve your health. You can purchase ebooks that I have published over the years. You can also get this new product that I have that you can start learning about how the body works by listening to my lectures and studying the PowerPoints that I create. I have created a module. It's a pulmonology module where you learn about the lung system in detail. There's 22 lectures with downloadable PDFs. There's a video lecture and a PDF for each section. There's 22 sections. Each day I upload a new lecture. So this module only costs you $50. When you make the purchase on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, under classes at the for the store, you pay $50 and you'll get an email for your unique password to be able to log in and see the videos and download the PDFs. It's a great way to learn about how the body works, and it's a great way to support my work. In addition, if you would like to support through donations, you can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or Buy Me a Coffee. The links are on my homepage at the very bottom of the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video. The international audience, they want to help support. You can support many different ways, through donations and through purchasing the ebooks or purchasing the medical modules that I'm publishing. In addition, you can also join my Patreon channel for membership, and there's different tiers, and the different tier groups do get some access to the pulmonary module, depending on which tier that you sign up for. If you're just tier 1, you get the videos like this, and you won't have access to the pulmonary module. But if you get the tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4, you'll have different accesses to the pulmonary module videos. With that said, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting my work. Make sure you subscribe to all 6 of my channels, 3 channels on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. I am heavily censored on YouTube, so it's very important to subscribe to all 6 channels. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.